I'm mad, I'm pissed, I'm anxious. And it's my little black son I have to look after and let him know that you can't roam the street without watching your back from the own law that's supposed to protect you. I have a target. I mean, look at me. I can't leave the house without saying, hey, my phone's charged. Hey, I got my Bluetooth on just to call you just in case. Same target I have, every black person has.
I'm looking for, in this election, people that are gonna take Black Lives Matter seriously, not just, put a little banner up and say Black Lives Matter, but what are you doing?
Nearly a third of registered voters cited criminal justice and policing, or race relations, as the most important issue in deciding their vote for president. Delisha Searcy is one of the many mothers mourning the death of her child at the hands of law enforcement. Her son, Devon Bailey, is one of the names that people are carrying during protests for police reform this year.
Put your hands up for me a sec.
In 2019, Devon was stopped by a Colorado Springs police officer investigating a reported armed robbery call, which would eventually found to be a false claim. But as Devon was running away from officers while being questioned, he was shot in the back.
Hands up! Hands up! Hands up!
A gun was found in the waistband of his shorts.
I was happy for him. Starting his family. And he was going along with everything. Got a job, got a car, has a girl, has a kid on the way.
How could you literally take your gun out, not even give him a warning and say, if you don't stop, I'm going to shoot. You just start shooting. It made me feel like you don't have respect for life. You don't care. You shouldn't be doing your job.
I don't think that this would happen to a white person in America at all. And it's sad that I even have to have this conversation, and it's 2020. On the side of their car, when they ride past you, it says, job is to protect and serve. And I've never encountered that with the police in my lifetime.
Didn't have to see him like that, man.
It's very important to vote, because whatever president you put in, okay, if they put a judge in, that judge makes decisions for the rest of your life.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
Not all police are bad.
The numbers are proving that there are more people who support and love the police and value the service that they provide our communities.
Calls for reform and defunding the police became flashpoints of debate as Americans marched this election year.
Thinking back to just a few months ago, but it feels much longer ago, we were really talking about a very different set of issues, especially in the Democratic primary, and it seemed like those were really going to be framing the general election as well. Issues like healthcare. We were even hearing more about issues like climate change, something that the Trump campaign has been pushing pretty hard, and we heard a lot about during the RNC, is the issue of violent crime and unrest in cities.
I am your president of law and order.
You know, obviously, since the racial injustice protests began at the beginning of the summer, issues around racial justice and police brutality have been much more front and center for Democrats than they were during the primary.
The day I found out he got shot, it literally knocked the wind out of me. Like, I just was gasping for air and I couldn't believe it. And I almost felt like a surreal moment. Like, I was like, okay, it's not true, it can't be true.
In the ensuing months after Devon's death in late 2019, the police officers involved were fully exonerated by a grand jury, and the state district attorney chose not to pursue additional charges. Under Colorado's fleeing felon law, officers could shoot a fleeing suspect if they believed he was armed and they were acting in self-defense.
There's a complete lack of trust. Knowing that an officer can get away with whatever he wants and still work these streets and be on these streets is terrifying. Because when that happens, you know that there's only a matter of time before it happens again.
9 months after Devon was killed, cities across the country were reconciling growing unrest for change after the deaths of George Floyd and others.
In Minneapolis, the city council voted to completely replace the existing police department and reimagine public safety. In Boston, the mayor declared racism a public health crisis and made a pledge to transfer funds from the police department's overtime budget towards community programs.
The reality is that, money for funding police departments and the solving and prevention of crime have essentially no relationship. The most important thing that's lost in translation is the idea that defunding the police doesn't simply mean defunding the police. It means refunding other things, refunding other social goods. If we can invest in people, invest in communities, give people the things that they need to make sure that their material needs are met, then a world without police, or at least without the police as currently conceived, is imminently possible.
I think it's pretty ridiculous to even, think of defunding the police. You're going to have lawlessness, you're going to have chaos, you're going to have anarchy like you've seen on the streets of Portland and Seattle and downtown Denver. That's anarchy, and that's what we'll have on a large scale if we defund the police. Now, law enforcement, they don't want to be social workers, and social workers don't want to be law enforcement.
In Colorado this year, where Devon Bailey, Elijah McClain, and other names were used as rallying cries during the protests, legislators at the state capitol furiously worked to get a police reform bill into the hands of the governor.
I am from Colorado Springs. I live in Denver, but I'm from Colorado Springs. So a lot of my friends that I grew up with and went to high school with were out there protesting and calling for justice for Devon. In reality, it could have been any of us. It could have been my brother. It could have been our friends. And we know that. We know that. So it's time to take action. We had letters from across Colorado, emails from across Colorado. Republicans were saying, I'm getting emails on this thing. Let's make this workable, I want to vote yes. Get me to yes. That's the opening, and I very much appreciate that. But it was because people from across Colorado joined in the chorus and asking for accountability.
I just want justice for him because this matters for everybody who has a child in their life. Never think it can never happen to you, because I thought that.
Leslie Herod and other Colorado legislators worked together to form the Enhanced Law Enforcement Integrity Act, which after initial pushback was met with broad bipartisan support. Included in the bill was mandatory body cameras for every officer in the state, legal consequences for officers who fail to intervene when another officer is using excessive force, an end to qualified immunity, which allows people to sue officers in their individual capacities up to $25,000, a ban on chokeholds, and a ban on officers being allowed to shoot someone running away if they don't pose a threat. It became the first major police reform bill passed this summer. Devon's family were invited to the ceremony signing it into law, but it was not without its share of critics.
The qualified immunity piece is devastating to our profession. Quite frankly, we're seeing law enforcement officers leave the law enforcement profession, exactly what we predicted would happen. We're seeing them leave in droves, and not just officers who were already about to retire, already had many years on the job. We're seeing young, good, progressive thinking officers who have only been in the job 3, 5, 7 years, who were just starting to get their feet on the ground with their careers. We're seeing them leave and say, I don't want to expose myself or my family to civil liability for a situation in which I made a decision based on the facts at the time.
The negative comments that come out of some of these legislators' mouth about law enforcement, no, I don't think they're getting a fair shake, and I question why anybody would want to get into the profession now, to be quite honest, to put up with all this. It's only a few bad apples, so to speak, in the law enforcement community that make it bad for everybody.
I shy away from this bad apples example because I don't mean to say that every single person who has ever put on a police uniform is a bad person. What I do mean to say is that it is an institution and a structure that just simply doesn't work in the way that people like to imagine that it does. If you are imagining it to be a system and institution that equitably keeps all people safe, it just simply that doesn't track.
Hopefully, through him losing his life, someone else is not burying their son, their daughter, their aunt, their uncle because they ran away. Not a threat, but because they decided to run away because of the pre-notion we've already seen on the news that if I get in an altercation with an officer, I may die. Let me get away from here.
The family has filed a civil lawsuit, and as of September 2020, the city has not responded.
Once the person is gone, that's why we have to spearhead it now, because we can't afford to lose thousands of more people before we decide to change one law, because it's not fair. It's just not fair. I mean, I'm grateful for the bill. I always say that, but it's too late for me. It's too late.